You're sitting at home, legally armed, and following every gun law on the books, when federal agents storm through your door, claiming authority under some new regulation. They seize your firearms, ransack your property, and when you try to fight back in court, the government simply says, "We can't be sued. We have immunity." For decades, this has been the nightmare scenario for gun owners facing federal overreach. But everything just changed. The Supreme Court just dropped a bombshell 9-0 unanimous decision that completely rewrites the rules of government accountability. And every single gun owner in America needs to know about this constitutional game changer right now. If you want to stay ahead of these critical developments that could protect your Second Amendment rights, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And let's break down exactly what this means for you. Stakes, consequences. Section. Here's what was at stake. If the federal government could claim blanket immunity every time they violated your constitutional rights, there would be zero consequences for unconstitutional gun raids, illegal firearm seizures, or wrongful arrests of law-abiding gun owners. A TF agents could kick down your door based on questionable regulations. Federal prosecutors could target you with selective enforcement, and they'd simply claim they were following policy and walk away untouched. This meant your Second Amendment rights existed only on paper, because the government faced no real accountability when they trampled those rights. This Supreme Court ruling just shattered that shield of protection and opened up entirely new ways for gun owners to hold the government accountable when they cross constitutional lines. Case introduction and constitutional framework. The case that changed everything is Martin versus the United States. While it didn't directly involve firearms, this 9-0 unanimous ruling created a massive precedent that will impact every future Second Amendment case. This decision fundamentally rewrote how government immunity works under the Federal Tort Claims Act, which is the exact legal framework used when gun owners try to sue the government for constitutional violations. For years, federal agents have hidden behind discretionary immunity, arguing they can't be held accountable as long as their actions were part of some policy decision or enforcement strategy. This has been the government's bulletproof vest against lawsuits, especially in Second Amendment cases where ATF agents conduct questionable raids or agencies exceed their statutory authority. The Supreme Court just ruled unanimously that federal agents can't hide behind this discretionary immunity shield when they violate citizens' rights, and that absolutely includes Second Amendment rights. The court said liability should be judged by the same standards that apply to private citizens under state law, meaning the government can no longer claim special protection that ordinary people don't get. Detailed case background and gun owner connection. Here's the incident that changed everything. In 2017, FBI agents were supposed to raid suspected gang members in suburban Atlanta, but the lead agent used his personal GPS and ended up at the completely wrong house. Without warning, federal agents smashed down Katrina Martin's front door, detonated flashbang grenades inside where a family with a 7-year-old was sleeping, dragged the adults out in handcuffs, and held them at gunpoint. They only realized their mistake when an agent noticed mail with a different address. These exact tactics are routinely used in ATF raids, red flag enforcement, and firearm seizures. The no-knock raids, flashbangs, drawn weapons, and handcuffs first approach. When the Martin family sued, the government used the same defense they always use against gun owners: discretionary immunity. They claimed agents were making operational decisions related to federal policy, so they couldn't be held accountable regardless of constitutional violations. This defense has protected federal agents for decades when they've conducted questionable gun raids or violated due process and Second Amendment enforcement, leaving gun owners with virtually no legal recourse. Previous legal barriers for gun owners. Before this decision, gun owners faced nearly impossible odds when trying to hold the federal government accountable for Second Amendment violations. The government had two main shields. First was the intentional tort exception. where they'd argue constitutional violations were intentional government acts citizens couldn't sue over. Second was the discretionary function exception. They'd claim any enforcement decision involving policy considerations gave them blanket immunity. When ATF agents conducted raids based on questionable regulations, or when agencies exceeded their statutory authority, they could walk away consequence-free by claiming they were following federal policy. Gun owners would spend thousands on legal fees only to watch judges dismiss their cases because the government claimed immunity. This created a system where Second Amendment rights existed only on paper, because there were no real consequences when federal agents trampled those rights. The Supreme Court's game-changing decision. The Supreme Court demolished these immunity claims in a crushing 9-0 unanimous decision written by Justice Gorsuch. Here's what they ruled. First, federal agents cannot claim blanket immunity just because their actions relate to federal policy or law enforcement operations, destroying the primary defense ATF agents and federal prosecutors have used for decades. Second, government liability must be judged by the same standards that apply to private citizens under state law, meaning federal agents can no longer claim special protections when they violate constitutional rights. Third, the court clarified that the Federal Tort Claims Act actually allows lawsuits against federal officers for intentional constitutional violations, including when agents exceed their authority in firearm enforcement. What makes this devastating for government overreach is that it's unanimous. All 9 justices agreed the immunity shield was being misused. This means every questionable ATF raid, every federal gun seizure that violates due process, and every case where agencies exceed their authority can now result in successful lawsuits. Immediate implications for gun owners. This decision is absolutely massive because it opens courthouse doors that have been slammed shut for decades. Every wrongful ATF raid, every unconstitutional gun seizure, and every federal overreach in firearm enforcement can now potentially result in successful lawsuits with real financial consequences. Federal agents participating in red flag enforcement can no longer hide behind immunity when they violate due process during firearm seizures. ATF raids based on questionable gun law interpretations now face personal accountability for agents. Federal surveillance on gun owners, illegal databases, or selective prosecution. All previously untouchable actions now face potential liability. The game changer is that federal agents know they can face real personal and financial consequences for constitutional violations. Gun owners who previously had zero legal recourse when federal agents exceeded their authority now have litigation tools that can actually succeed, fundamentally changing the risk-reward calculation for government overreach. Future constitutional fights and strategy. This decision gives Second Amendment advocates powerful new litigation tools that will reshape how we fight federal gun control. We're about to see a wave of lawsuits challenging federal gun enforcement tactics that were previously untouchable. This includes direct challenges to ATF enforcement methods that exceed statutory authority, federal involvement in state-level gun seizures, and aspects of federal gun regulations that violate constitutional rights through enforcement. Gun rights organizations now have a viable strategy to target not just the regulations themselves, but how those regulations are enforced by agents who can no longer claim blanket immunity. This creates opportunities to challenge no-knock raids on gun owners, federal databases that violate privacy rights, and selective enforcement patterns. The strategic advantage is enormous because Second Amendment advocates can now hold individual agents and agencies financially accountable for constitutional violations during enforcement. What gun owners should do now? So what should you do? First, understand that your rights against federal overreach just got significantly stronger, but you need to be prepared to use these protections effectively. Start documenting any interactions with federal agents, especially ATF encounters, because detailed records of constitutional violations are now much more valuable in court. Don't just accept government overreach as inevitable. Questionable federal gun enforcement tactics can now be challenged effectively. If you face federal gun enforcement that seems to exceed statutory authority or violate due process, this ruling provides accountability avenues that didn't exist before. Stay informed about how this plays out in lower courts, because early cases will establish important precedents. Most importantly, support organizations and legal foundations prepared to use these tools strategically, because having the right to sue is only valuable with competent legal representation that understands this precedent. Conclusion. This 9-0 unanimous decision represents a massive victory for constitutional accountability that every gun owner should celebrate. Make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell so you don't miss how this ruling plays out in future Second Amendment cases.